Welcome to Inside Report. I'm your host, Bruce Schlussman. We're here in the office of Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, who was kind enough to join us on today's episode about the border. Thanks so much for joining us, Senator.
Bruce, good to see you. Welcome.
Good to see you too. So I wanted to talk first about President Trump's national emergency, about the crisis on the border, and I know you issued a statement about that. If you want to discuss that a little bit.
Well, sure. Look, by any measure, we unquestionably have a crisis at the border. We've had a crisis for many years. I represent the great state of Texas. Of our 2,000-mile border with the nation of Mexico, 1,200 of those miles are in the state of Texas. And I spend a lot of time down at the border. And we are seeing the consequences of an unsecured border every day. We're seeing it in terms of suffering. We're seeing it in terms of number one, human traffickers coming across the border unchecked, resulting in little boys and little girls getting physically abused, getting sexually abused. Nobody who cares about compassion, nobody who cares about humanity should want even a single little boy or little girl in the custody of a human trafficker.
Absolutely.
But number two, narcotics traffickers, and they're often one and the same, who are bringing vast quantities of narcotics into this country, who are bringing heroin, who are bringing fentanyl into this country. And we are seeing an opioid epidemic. Last year, 70,000 Americans died of drug overdoses. That is more people than died in car accidents. And so I am glad that the president is treating this as the crisis that it is. I am glad that he is devoting resources to securing the border. We need to build the wall, but building the wall isn't all of it. It is part of the solution, but it's not all of it. We also need technology. We need infrared. We need fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft, and we need critically boots on the ground. I believe we should triple the U.S. Border Patrol, and I've been fighting to do that since the day I was elected to the Senate.
We talk about these caravans that came in.
Yeah.
Judicial Watch did a lot of work on that in Guatemala when the first wave came. Now we have what the media is referring to as the mother of all caravans coming. So this crisis is getting a lot more real for a lot of people. Do you want to talk a little bit about that caravan?
Well, we look at the numbers we're already seeing on the border. They're spiking dramatically as we see bigger caravans building. It is a pattern of lawlessness. And I'll tell you, a big part of the reason we're seeing it happen is because the U.S. Congress isn't doing its job. And in particular, Senate Democrats and now House Democrats are blocking any real reforms to secure the borders. Unfortunately, our immigration law is riddled with loopholes. Loopholes that mean that if someone comes here illegally between laws Congress has passed and a decision of the courts called the Flores decision, it's a settlement, and then the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has interpreted that settlement. The result is that if a smuggler brings a child with them, it is functioning in practice almost like a get-out-of-jail-free card. And so it's creating this horrible incentive for drug smugglers to bring little children with them because they know U.S. law, they can take advantage of it, they can exploit it. That's terrible for the kids, but it's also terrible for U.S. law, and we should close the loopholes. And Senate Democrats need to stop playing politics with this and actually fix the process. And in particular, what is critical is we've got to end catch and release. Catch and release doesn't work. Right now, you have people crossing the borders who immediately flag down a Border Patrol agent. It's not even that they're getting caught. They go look for someone because all they have to do is put in a claim of asylum. And for a great many of them, they end up getting released. They have a court date, and they're told, well, please show up for this court date. And to the shock of nobody, a whole bunch of them never show up again and disappear. As long as we keep following catch and release, we're going to keep seeing waves and waves of unchecked illegal immigration. We've got to stop that.
So I'm so glad you mentioned this get-out-of-jail-free card that we're talking about, because sanctuary cities is a huge part of that.
Yeah.
And I know Judicial Watch has a lot of lawsuits about that. You've done a lot of work in that department. Do you want to tell us a little bit about sanctuary cities?
Look, sanctuary cities are wrong. They consist of local elected officials, typically elected Democrats, who are defying federal immigration law, who are saying, we are going to release criminal illegal aliens into our communities. And it is an example of just how extreme, just how radical today's Democratic Party has gotten. I'm the author in the Senate of Kate's Law. Kate's Law, as you know, is named for Kate Steinle, beautiful young woman in California, 28 years old. She was on a pier in Northern California with her dad when an illegal alien, a criminal illegal alien who'd been repeatedly in and out of jail, he'd been repeatedly deported, when he shot and killed and murdered her. Kate's Law is a very simple common sense legislation that says if you have a criminal illegal alien who's convicted of multiple criminal offenses and repeatedly enters the country illegally, that criminal illegal alien faces a mandatory minimum prison sentence. If Kate's Law had been on the books, Kate Steinle would still be alive. You know, I've spent time with the Steinle family. The last words Kate Steinle said to her dad were, "Save me, Dad." I got to say, as the father of daughters, I can't imagine the agony, the helplessness of not being able to do anything to prevent that. And Kate's Law right now, if you look in the country, overwhelming bipartisan majorities of Americans support Kate's Law, 70, 80, 90%. But Senate Democrats are filibustering it. The modern Democratic Party is so extreme that this is not about so-called dreamers. This is not about all sorts of other issues on which there are reasonable disagreements. This is violent criminal illegal aliens. This is murderers and rapists and drug dealers that the Democrats and the sanctuary cities are releasing into our communities, and far too many Americans their lives are being taken because of the extreme position of today's Democratic Party.
So we're talking about solutions, and you just mentioned Kate's Law. You know, there are other great solutions that people proposed. One of them is your El Chapo bill, dealing with how to fund the wall, because Democrats suddenly got fiscally conservative now that we're talking about something they don't want. And you mentioned civil asset forfeiture and seizing all of this and putting it into this project. Do you want to speak a little bit more about that bill?
Absolutely, and the point you made at the outset is exactly right. Set aside for a second that this is the first time in recorded history that Democrats have thought anything spends too much money. I mean, they're willing to spend money on anything. You know, this insane Green New Deal they're getting behind would cost $93 trillion, which is more than every dollar the federal government has expended in the entire history of the United States. So they don't exactly have a record of fiscal responsibility. But when it comes to the wall, they say, whoa, building a wall is too expensive. I said, all right, let's take you at your word. The El Chapo Act is legislation I introduced. It's very simple. It says we should take all the money criminally forfeited from El Chapo and from other drug lords and use those billions to build the wall. We can build the wall without a penny of federal taxpayer dollars, just using the ill-gotten gains, the billions of dollars these narco-traffickers have made crossing the border illegally. And I got to tell you the history of how I came up with this bill. At the time of the debate, the estimates for the cost of the wall were $14 to $20 billion for fully completing it. At the same time, the Department of Justice put out an estimate of El Chapo's global net worth of his criminal empire, and it was roughly $14 billion. And I have to say that there was a natural and even elegant symmetry to it. That if he's going to make, and he has made, billions from profiting from murder and torture and poisoning Americans, that those billions and the billions of other drug lords like him should go to building the wall. Now, we have yet to get a vote on the El Chapo Act. I have been pressing for many, many months to get a vote. But I'm going to tell you right now, when we do get a vote, I think we will get a vote, I'm going to predict that all or virtually all the Democrats are going to vote no, because it ain't about the money. And it isn't even about policy. You know, it's not even that they oppose a wall. Go back to 2013, it was not very long ago. 2013, Chuck Schumer and every Democrat in the Senate voted in favor of 350 miles of new wall. They all voted in favor of it. Just a few months ago, Democrats shut the federal government down to stop 234 miles of new wall. Now explain to me, Bruce, how are you in favor of 350 miles of new wall and you're against 234 miles? They're not. It's just this incredibly polarized political time. Here is the sum total of the Democratic analysis on this. Trump equals wall, Trump bad, therefore wall bad. That's it. That's not good for America. And we need to be coming together and solving the problem of illegal immigration instead of just playing this anger politics that's animating the Democratic Party right now.
Absolutely. And we've been talking about, sanctuary cities, your bill, and recently there's been a change in the Homeland Secretary, and this new person, there isn't a lot of information about this. Do you think there's a change in direction in the way things are going with the change in secretary?
Look, I don't know. I hope so. I will say, if you look at the beginning of the Trump administration, the first 6 months of the Trump administration, illegal crossings plummeted. They dropped about 70%. I went down to the border. I talked with Border Patrol agents. I asked, okay, why is this happening? Because we hadn't built a wall. Mm-hmm. We hadn't hired a significant number of new Border Patrol agents. I asked, okay, what's different? There hadn't been enough time for a whole lot to change. And the answer the Border Patrol agents gave me is they said the biggest thing that was different is the cartels and the traffickers believed they now had an administration in office who would follow the law. And simply believing that meant that more than 2/3 of the illegal traffic disappeared. Now, unfortunately, what happened is because of the loopholes Congress has mandated, because of the judicial decisions and activism, we continued doing catch and release. And so people coming here illegally, they got here and suddenly they got released. Or they picked up the phone and they called back home, they called their friends, they called their family, and said, hey, guess what? It's the same as it was before. If you get here, you get to stay. We've got to fix catch and release or we're not going to solve this problem. And that ultimately, that's going to take Congress acting. I think it's going to be very difficult for any Homeland Security Secretary to solve it until Congress steps forward to close the loopholes.
I want to change gears a little bit here and talk about your recent letter to Yale over a lot of censorship that's going on in campuses, and we're seeing an unprecedented, what appears to be like an attack on the First Amendment, especially at schools like Yale. Yeah. You wrote a letter about that. Would you mind speaking to that?
One of the most disturbing things we're seeing across the country and in colleges and universities is an extreme left-wing censorship that is trying to silence views that the left disagrees with. We saw just a couple of weeks ago a new policy come out from Yale that openly and nakedly discriminates against Christians, against Christian organizations, against organizations that believe in traditional marriage and traditional values. And I'll tell you the origin of where this came from. There's a group, the Alliance Defending Freedom. It's a wonderful public interest law firm that litigates religious liberty cases across the country. I've worked with ADF many times in the past. They have every year what are called Blackstone Fellows, which are law students that they support and they help train to defend religious liberty. Yale has a number of financial aid policies that encourage their students and graduates to do public interest. So if you come out of Yale Law School and you choose not to go to some big fancy law firm, but instead to do something in the public interest, Yale has stipends that while you're in law school, they'll help you meet your expenses. And then actually, if you graduate, Yale has a loan repayment program that if you do public interest, they'll help you repay your law school loans. Well, a couple of weeks ago, they announced a new exception. There's one exception and one exception only. They're going to allow financial aid for public interest for everybody, unless you're a Christian, unless you're working for a Christian organization that supports traditional marriage and traditional sexual values. They're framing it as a non-discrimination policy, but the reason is ADF had a lawyer who came and spoke at Yale. And the LGBT group at Yale Law School is called Outlaws. They were very upset about this, and they protested, and they demanded that the dean ban this person from campus, but they demanded that the dean cut off financial aid for students that choose to work with ADF. And Yale announced this new policy that seems almost singularly designed to punish Yale law students who choose to go to work with ADF. Now, I sent the dean a letter last week informing the dean of the Yale Law School that the Constitution Subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee, of which I'm the chairman, is opening an investigation into Yale's discrimination and facially discriminatory policy based on religious faith. The First Amendment protects our religious liberty. The First Amendment protects our free speech. Yale's policy doesn't do either one. And federal civil rights law prohibit discrimination against people because of religious faith. Yale is telling its students, you can do anything you want unless you happen to have a faith and want to act upon that faith, then we're going to discriminate against you. And that is contrary to law. So we're going to be investigating it. And I hope Yale changes this policy and stops discriminating against people based on their faith.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Senator, today, and thank you for filling us in on what's happening with the border and what's happening with Yale. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us on Inside Report. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Please be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and if you support our work and Judicial Watch, please be sure to donate on our website. Thank you for joining us.